23 years of being called the disappointment, 23 years of watching my brother Quentin get everything while I got nothing. But as I sat in that Harvard auditorium, watching my father hand over our family's $75 million logistics empire to my golden boy brother, a stranger changed everything with 7 words. They don't know who your real father is. What I discovered in that folder didn't just change my life, it destroyed theirs. My name is Deacon Whitmore, or at least that's what I've been told my whole life. I'm 28 years old, and until 3 weeks ago I was the forgotten son of the Whitmore shipping dynasty. You know the type of family I'm talking about, the ones with portraits in museum wings, summer compounds that have been in the family for generations, and enough money to make problems disappear with a phone call. Except I was their only problem they couldn't solve. My mother, Vivian Whitmore, is 52 years old and has never met a mirror she didn't love or a compliment she didn't expect. She runs charity galas the way generals run military campaigns, with precision, ruthlessness, and zero tolerance for imperfection. She introduced me at social events as our other son Deacon, like I was an afterthought she had to acknowledge for tax purposes. Her diamonds cost more than most people's houses, but her heart was worth less than costume jewelry when it came to me. The man I called father for 23 years, Sterling Whitmore, built his shipping empire from his daddy's money and other people's sweat. 55 years old with silver hair that he swears turned that color from the stress of building his business, not from the stress of having me as a son, though he's made that joke enough times at dinner parties. He could tell you the hull number of every ship in his fleet, but he couldn't tell you what position I played on my high school baseball team. I was the starting pitcher, by the way. We went to state championships. Not that he noticed. Then there's Quentin, my older brother by 2 years, 30 years old, Harvard MBA, and God's gift to the shipping industry if you believed our parents. Perfect Quentin with his perfect grades and his perfect internships and his perfect ability to make me invisible just by walking into a room. He didn't even have to try to be the favorite. He was born for it, groomed for it, celebrated for it. Every report card, every trophy, every acceptance letter was framed and displayed like religious artifacts in our Connecticut mansion. But here's the thing about being the forgotten son. You learn to watch. You learn to listen. You learn to see things that people think they're hiding. Like how Mother's smile never quite reached her eyes when she looked at Father. Like how Father's jaw clenched every time someone mentioned children resembling their parents. Like how Quentin's confidence was as fragile as spun glass, ready to shatter at the first real challenge. That graduation day at Harvard was supposed to be Quentin's coronation, the day he officially became heir to the throne of Whitmore Shipping International. The burgundy banners hung from every archway, the brass band played songs older than the buildings, and hundreds of America's finest families gathered to watch their children grab their golden tickets to the upper echelon of society. I drove myself there in my 2015 Ford F-150, the one with the dented bumper and the radio that only picked up AM stations. I parked it between a Lamborghini and a Bentley, both of which probably belonged to kids younger than me. My suit was off the rack from Macy's, the same one I wore to every family function where my presence was required but not wanted. Navy blue, nothing special, just like me according to everyone who mattered. The usher looked at my invitation twice, like he couldn't believe a Whitmore would arrive alone and underdressed. He led me to my seat in the back row, so far from the stage I could barely make out the podium. My parents sat in the front row, of course, in seats reserved for families who donated buildings, not just tuition checks. Mother wore a St. John suit that cost more than I made in 6 months at the warehouse. Father's cufflinks caught the light like tiny stars, each one worth a car payment. I should have left right then. I should have recognized this for what it was. Not just a graduation, but a public execution of any hope I had left of mattering to my family. But I stayed. I stayed because somewhere deep in my chest, buried under years of disappointment, was a stupid, stubborn spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd remember I existed. That spark was about to become a wildfire, and the woman walking toward me through the crowd was carrying the match. Nadira Castellano moved through the assembly like she owned every molecule of air in the building. Elegant, purposeful, and holding a manila folder that would reveal 23 years of lies. But I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew was that I was Deacon Whitmore, the useless son, sitting in the back row of my brother's Triumph, about to discover that everything I thought I knew about myself was a carefully constructed lie. And the truth was worth more than every penny of the Whitmore fortune. The ceremony was about to begin, the last ceremony where I'd ever be called a Whitmore. And honestly, I couldn't wait to see their faces when they realized what they'd thrown away. Growing up in the Whitmore family meant living in Quentin's shadow, except shadows are supposed to be dark and quiet, and Quentin's shadow was lit up like Times Square with constant celebration and praise. Our Connecticut estate sprawled across 40 acres of manicured perfection, with two distinct wings that might as well have been different universes. The east wing belonged to Quentin, a shrine to achievement with floor-to-ceiling displays of trophies, academic awards, and photographs of him shaking hands with senators, CEOs, and even a former president at some youth leadership summit. The west wing was mine, decorated with participation ribbons and team photos where you had to squint to find me in the back row. "Quentin, show your Uncle Harrison your Harvard acceptance letter," Mother would say at every family gathering, her perfectly manicured fingers adjusting his collar like he was a prize show dog. Her diamond rings caught the light with every gesture, throwing tiny rainbows across the room that seemed to land everywhere except on me. Then she'd glance my way with that practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. Deacon's still figuring things out. Some people just bloom later, don't they, dear? Uncle Harrison would nod politely, but I caught the pity in his eyes. The same look you'd give a three-legged dog that was trying its best to keep up with the pack. He'd pat my shoulder and slip me a $20 bill like I was 12 instead of 28, probably thinking he was being kind to the family failure. I worked at one of our family's shipping warehouses in Newark, and not in some executive training position either. I was a floor supervisor, which meant I loaded trucks, managed inventory, and dealt with union disputes over coffee breaks and overtime pay. Every morning, my alarm went off at 4:30 a.m., and I'd drive through the dark to get there before the first shift started at 6. My hands had calluses that makeup couldn't hide, and I knew every forklift operator, every dock worker, and every truck driver by their first name. "Why do you insist on embarrassing us?" Father said one evening at dinner, examining my hands like they were covered in something contagious. He'd noticed the grease under my fingernails that no amount of scrubbing could remove. "Your brother's about to graduate from Harvard Business School, and you're content being a common laborer? Someone needs to know how the actual business runs," I replied, cutting into my steak with more force than necessary. "Those trucks don't load themselves, and those workers don't manage themselves either." Quentin laughed, that easy, confident laugh of someone who'd never had to prove their worth. He adjusted his Rolex, the one Father gave him for getting into Harvard, making sure the gold caught the candlelight. "That's what we hire people for, little brother. Leaders don't need to get their hands dirty. They need vision, strategy, the ability to see the big picture." "Hard to see the big picture when you've never looked at the small details," I shot back. Mother's fork clinked against her plate, the sound sharp as a judge's gavel. "Deacon, please, let's not ruin dinner with your warehouse wisdom. Quentin's professor says he has the best strategic mind in his class." Of course he did. Quentin's professors had been saying he was the best since pre-kindergarten, when he finger-painted a blob that Mother swore looked like a Monet. Meanwhile, I could rebuild a diesel engine blindfolded. But that wasn't the kind of talent that got framed and hung in the family gallery. The graduation invitation arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by courier like it was a court summons. The envelope was heavier than my monthly bills combined, made from paper that felt like fabric and money had a baby. Inside, the invitation was embossed with gold lettering that probably cost more than most people spent on their actual weddings. The Whitmore family cordially invites you to celebrate Quentin Sterling Whitmore's graduation from Harvard Business School. My name wasn't even listed as a host, just lumped in with the general admission crowd like I was a distant cousin instead of his brother. I'd stood in that Newark warehouse, surrounded by the real machinery of our family fortune, holding that invitation while Eddie, one of the forklift operators, asked if everything was okay. Family thing, I'd told him, and he'd nodded with the understanding of a man who knew that family could cut deeper than any workplace injury. The truth was, I'd learned more about business in that warehouse than Quentin had learned in his ivory tower classrooms. I knew that Jose's daughter needed surgery and he couldn't afford the copay even with our insurance. I knew that Williams had been sober for 8 years, but still went to meetings every Thursday. I knew that when the cooling system broke in July, productivity dropped 30%. Not because people were lazy, but because human beings weren't meant to work in 100-degree heat. These weren't cases studies or theoretical models. These were real people with real problems that affected real business. But none of that mattered to Sterling and Vivian Whitmore. To them, I was just playing in the dirt while Quentin was preparing to inherit an empire, built on that very dirt I was too proud to wash from under my fingernails. Harvard's graduation hall buzzed with the kind of energy you only find when hundreds of wealthy families gather to celebrate their investments finally paying off. The building itself was a monument to old money, with mahogany panels that had watched generations of America's elite collect their expensive pieces of paper. I found my seat in the back row, behind 300 other attendees who apparently mattered more than the second son. The program listed me simply as family guest, while my parents had their full names and titles printed like they were royalty. The ceremony dragged on with Latin phrases nobody understood, but everyone pretended to appreciate. Honorary degrees were handed out to billionaires who probably hadn't read a book since the last time they bought their way onto a bestseller list. Then finally, after what felt like hours of self-congratulation, Quentin walked across that stage. Mother actually stood up and applauded, her Cartier bracelet catching the light as she clapped. Father's chest swelled with the kind of pride I'd only seen when he closed multi-million-dollar deals. The dean shook Quentin's hand like he was greeting a future president, and why not? In their world, money and power were the same thing, and Quentin was about to have both. After the ceremony, we moved to the grand ballroom for the reception. Crystal chandeliers hung from a ceiling painted with Renaissance-style murals, and waiters in white gloves circulated with champagne that probably cost more per bottle than most people's car payments. I grabbed a glass and found a corner where I could watch the show unfold. Quentin worked the room like a politician, shaking hands and accepting congratulations with the practiced ease of someone who'd been preparing for this moment his entire life. Then Father clinked his champagne glass with a gold pen, the sound cutting through the chatter like a bell. Sterling Whitmore didn't need to ask for attention. He commanded it simply by existing in a space. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have a moment," he began, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd never been interrupted in his life. "Today isn't just about celebrating my son's Harvard degree, though that alone would be worth all this fuss." Polite laughter rippled through the crowd. Mother stood beside him, her hand on his arm in a gesture that looked supportive but was probably just steadying herself after her 4th glass of champagne. "Today is about the future," Father continued, his voice growing stronger. "The future of Whitmore Shipping International, a company my father built from nothing and that I've expanded into a $75 million enterprise." My stomach tightened. I knew where this was going, but hearing it announced publicly was like watching a car accident in slow motion. "It gives me great pleasure to announce that Quentin will inherit everything." He paused for effect, his eyes scanning the crowd but never finding mine. "The company, our 12 vintage car collection, including the 1965 Ferrari that once belonged to Steve McQueen, our Manhattan penthouse on Central Park West, the house in the Hamptons where we summer, and yes, even the Connecticut estate where both boys grew up. Both boys, that's how he referred to us. Quentin by name, me as an afterthought. To the future CEO of Whitmore Shipping International. Father raised his glass higher, and the room erupted in applause. Business partners rushed forward to shake Quentin's hand. Mother kissed his cheek, leaving a lipstick mark she immediately wiped away with her thumb in that motherly gesture I'd seen 1,000 times but never experienced myself. Photographers captured the moment for the society pages, the flash of cameras creating a strobe effect that made everything feel surreal. And I sat there, invisible, holding a glass of champagne that suddenly tasted like battery acid mixed with disappointment. Nothing. The word escaped my lips as a whisper. 23 years of loyalty, of work, of trying, and I get nothing? That's when I saw her. She moved through the crowd with a purpose that made everyone else look like they were standing still. Navy dress, elegant but understated, silver hair pulled back in a way that suggested she had better things to do than worry about fashion. Her green eyes locked onto mine from across the room, and she walked straight toward me like a guided missile finding its target. The crowd seemed to part for her without realizing they were doing it. She had that kind of presence that made people step aside instinctively, the way you'd move for someone carrying something dangerous. She stopped directly in front of me, close enough that I could smell her perfume, something expensive but not overwhelming. "Deacon Whitmore?" "Yes," I replied, confused why this stranger knew my name when half the people in this room probably didn't. She placed a manila folder in my hands with the kind of deliberate motion that suggested this was more than just paperwork. The folder was thick, heavy with what felt like the weight of secrets. "Your mother's been lying to you for 23 years, she said, her voice carrying a slight accent that might have been Spanish or Italian. "They don't know who your real father is." "What are you talking about?" My voice cracked slightly, the champagne glass trembling in my other hand. She leaned closer, her green eyes never leaving mine. "Open it when you're alone. Everything you thought you knew about yourself is wrong. Your real inheritance isn't here in this room full of peacocks pretending to be eagles. It's waiting for you in Miami." "Who are you?" I managed to ask, but she was already turning away. "Someone who's been waiting 23 years to deliver that folder," she said over her shoulder. "Your real family sends their regards." Then she vanished into the crowd as quickly as she'd appeared, leaving me standing there holding a folder that felt like it might contain either my destruction or my salvation. Around me, the party continued. Quentin was posing for photos with the dean. Mother was telling someone about their renovation plans for the Hampton house. Father was discussing stock portfolios with his golf buddies. And I stood there, invisible as always, but now holding something that would make them all see me clearly for the first time in their lives. I left the reception immediately, walking past the valet station where teenagers in red jackets were juggling keys to cars worth more than houses. My beat-up Ford F-150 sat in the parking lot like a rust-spotted thumb among manicured fingers, surrounded by Bentleys, Ferraris, and Mercedes that gleamed under the Harvard floodlights. I climbed into my truck, locked the doors, and turned on the dome light that flickered twice before staying on, just bright enough to read by. My hands shook as I opened the folder. The first document was a DNA test from 2001. The paper yellowed at the edges, but the words crystal clear. I read the conclusion 3 times before my brain accepted what my eyes were seeing. Probability of paternity between Sterling Whitmore and Deacon, 0%, 0%. Not 99.9% certain he was my father, 0%. Absolutely no chance. The man who'd spent 23 years being disappointed in me wasn't even my father. The next page made my heart stop completely. A photograph of my mother, young and radiant in a way I'd never seen her, standing on Miami Beach next to a man who looked like me in 20 years. Same dark eyes, same strong jaw, Same broad shoulders that had always made me look different from Quentin's lean runner's build. The man had his arm around my mother's waist, and she was looking at him with an expression I'd never seen her give Sterling. Written on the back in faded blue ink, Vivian and Rodrigo, Miami Beach, 2000. I flipped to the next document, a legal filing from Miami-Dade County Probate Court. Rodrigo Castellano, Cuban-American shipping magnate, had died 3 months ago. His will, properly witnessed and notarized, contained a section highlighted in yellow. To my biological son, Deacon, whom I was never allowed to meet but have watched from afar, I leave my entire estate, including Castellano International Holdings, all associated properties and personal assets, totaling approximately $400 million. $400 million! I read the number again. That wasn't a typo. The warehouse supervisor who couldn't afford a new truck was apparently the heir to nearly $500 million. But the final page was what broke me. A letter in my mother's handwriting. The same elegant script that had signed dismissive notes to my teachers and cold birthday cards with just her name. No love preceding it. Rodrigo. Sterling can never know about that night. He's sterile from his racing accident in college, but he doesn't know it yet. The doctors told me privately when we were trying to conceive. I'm pregnant with your child, but this baby will be raised as a Whitmore. The Whitmore name opens doors. Your money never could. Don't contact me again. Your money means nothing compared to the social standing Sterling provides. The child will have everything that matters. Vivian. Everything that matters. Apparently, that didn't include the truth or a father who actually wanted me. My phone rang, Mother's ringtone playing that classical piece she insisted was sophisticated. I stared at her name on the screen for a moment, then answered. "Where are you?" she demanded, her voice sharp with irritation. "Your father's about to give his second toast. It's rude to leave during your brother's celebration." "He's not my father," I said quietly, each word deliberate and clear. Silence stretched between us for so long I thought the call had dropped. Then, barely a whisper, "What did you just say?" "Miami Beach, 2000. Rodrigo Castellano. Ring any bells, Mother?" I kept my voice steady, though my heart was pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it through the phone. "Or should I just read you this letter you wrote? The one where you admit Sterling is sterile?" The line went dead. She'd hung up on me. 23 years of lies, and she couldn't even give me the courtesy of an explanation. I sat in that truck for another 10 minutes, staring at the documents spread across my passenger seat. My entire life had been built on a foundation of lies. Every dismissive comment from Sterling made sense now. Some part of him must have sensed I wasn't his. Every cold glance from Mother was guilt disguised as disappointment. She'd looked at me every day and seen her secret, her mistake, her compromise for social status. But Rodrigo Castellano had known. He'd known and he'd waited. He'd built an empire that dwarfed the Whitmore's efforts and left it all to the son he'd never been allowed to claim. I made my decision right there in that parking lot, surrounded by the cars of people who'd never questioned their place in the world. I drove straight to Logan Airport, my truck's engine complaining about the speed but holding together like it always did. At the United Airlines counter, I bought a one-way ticket to Miami using the emergency credit card I'd never maxed out because I'd been saving it for a real emergency. If finding out your entire life was a lie didn't qualify, nothing would. "Any bags to check?" the attendant asked. "No," I replied. "I'm leaving everything behind." She gave me a confused look but printed my boarding pass. Gate 23, departing in 2 hours. I had no clothes except what I was wearing, no plan except to find out who Rodrigo Castellano was, and no idea what I'd find in Miami except a truth that had been kept from me for 23 years. As I waited at the gate, my phone exploded with messages. 17 missed calls from Mother, 12 from Sterling, text after text from Quentin ranging from confusion to anger. "Where are you?" Mom's having a breakdown. Dad's screaming at everyone. What did you do? I turned off my phone and boarded the plane. For the first time in my life, I wasn't running away from something. I was running toward it. Toward a father who'd wanted me, toward an inheritance that was actually mine, toward a truth that would destroy the Whitmore's carefully constructed world. The flight attendant asked if I wanted a drink. Champagne, I said, thinking of that bitter glass at Harvard. I'm celebrating. What's the occasion? She asked with a practiced smile. I just found out who I really am. The Castellano International Holdings building in downtown Miami made Whitmore Shipping look like a lemonade stand run by children. 40 floors of black glass and steel rose into the Florida sky, reflecting clouds and catching sunlight like it was harvesting power from the heavens. The lobby alone could have swallowed the entire Whitmore Shipping headquarters, with marble floors so polished I could see my nervous reflection walking across them. Security guards in suits that cost more than my truck nodded as I approached, like they'd been expecting me. Nadira Castellano met me in the executive boardroom on the 40th floor. The room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Biscayne Bay, where massive cargo ships moved in and out of port like choreographed dancers. She stood with her back to me initially, watching the ships, then turned with that same purposeful grace I'd seen at Harvard. I'm your aunt, she said simply, like she was stating the weather. Rodrigo was my brother. She gestured to a leather chair that probably cost more than I made in a month. I sat, trying to process that this elegant woman was my family, my real family. She pulled up a presentation on the wall screen that materialized from what I'd thought was just a black wall. Your father built a shipping empire that makes the Whitmores look like small-time operators. We move cargo through every major port from Miami to Rio de Janeiro. Castellano International has contracts with governments, not just corporations. We don't just ship products, we move economies. The numbers on the screen made my head spin. Annual revenue in the billions. Fleet sizes that dwarfed Whitmore's boutique operation. Political connections that reached into the White House and beyond. The company's worth $400 million in liquid assets alone, she continued, clicking through slides of properties, ships, and subsidiary companies. But the real value is in the contracts and connections. Your father spent 23 years building something that couldn't be ignored or dismissed, just like his son. My legs felt weak. $400 million? That's just the starting point. She handed me another folder, this one bound in leather with my name embossed in gold. Rodrigo knew about you from the beginning. Your mother thought she was clever, but Rodrigo had his own DNA test done when you were 2. A strand of your hair from a barber shop, if you can believe it. He's been watching you your entire life. She showed me surveillance photos that made my blood run cold and warm at the same time. There I was at high school graduation, looking lost even then. Loading trucks at the warehouse, laughing with Eddie and the guys. One from last Christmas dinner at the Whitmore estate, where I sat at the far end of the table like an exile. In every photo, I could see now what I'd missed then. Someone had been watching. Someone had cared enough to document these moments. Why didn't he contact me? My voice cracked despite my efforts to control it. Your mother threatened to destroy him if he tried. She had connections through Sterling, political leverage that could have made business difficult. But more than that, Rodrigo was smart. He knew Sterling was sterile from the beginning. Found out through a private investigator who accessed medical records from Sterling's racing accident at Yale. Sterling had been told he might have fertility issues, but being Sterling, he refused to believe it or get tested. Wait, if Sterling's sterile, then how did Mother explain Quentin? Nadira's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. That's the beautiful part. Quentin isn't Sterling's son either. Your mother had an affair with Sterling's business partner, Harrison Vale, 2 years before you were born. That's why Quentin got everything. Vivian had to keep Sterling happy and distracted, Or he might start asking questions about why his sons looked nothing like him. Harrison Vale. Uncle Harrison, who'd always been around, who'd always paid special attention to Quentin, who'd always looked at him with a pride that went beyond family friend. It all made horrible, perfect sense. But here's the truly beautiful part, Nadira continued, pulling up legal documents on the screen. The Whitmore fortune is built on contracts with Castellano International. 70% of their shipping routes run through our ports. 80% of their international contracts are partnerships with our subsidiaries, and every single contract has a very interesting clause that Sterling never bothered to read carefully. They can be terminated with 30 days' notice if the company is ever run by someone who isn't a biological Whitmore. But Quentin isn't a biological Whitmore, I said, the implications hitting me like a physical force. Exactly. The moment Quentin takes over, we can pull every contract. Whitmore shipping will collapse within 6 months, probably 3. My phone, which I'd turned back on after landing, buzzed with increasingly frantic texts from Quentin. What did you do? Dad's having a breakdown. Mom locked herself in her room. The lawyers are here. Answer me now. Nadira placed a pen in front of me, a Mont Blanc that weighed more than seemed possible for something so small. Sign here, and you become CEO of Castellano International. Your birthright, your real inheritance. Everything Rodrigo built, he built for you. I thought about 23 years of being called useless, of watching Quentin get praise for simply breathing while I worked until my hands bled and still wasn't enough. I thought about my mother choosing status over truth, Sterling's dismissive looks, the back row at Harvard, the nothing I was supposed to inherit while Quentin got everything. I signed my name, Deacon Castellano. The moment I finished the last letter of my new old name, Nadira handed me one more envelope. Rodrigo left you a letter. He wrote it a week before he died, when the cancer had spread too far to fight, but not far enough to stop him from writing. I opened it with trembling hands, the paper inside handwritten in bold strokes. My son, I've waited your entire life to give you what was always yours. I watched you build character in that warehouse while your brother built ego in Harvard. You learned the value of hard work while he learned the art of entitlement. You became a man despite them, not because of them. I'm sorry I couldn't be there, but I made sure you'd have everything in the end. Blood doesn't make family, but it does make heirs. Welcome home, your real father, Rodrigo. I read it 3 times, memorizing every word, every loop of his handwriting, every place where the pen had pressed harder with emotion. This stranger, this man I'd never met, had been more of a father in death than Sterling had been in life. 3 weeks later, I stood in my new office overlooking the Miami harbor, watching Castellano ships move in and out of port like pieces on a chessboard I now controlled. The morning sun painted the water gold, and I could see our logo on everything from massive container ships to the trucks loading at the docks below. My secretary knocked, a professional sound that still made me look up in surprise that I had a secretary at all. Mr. Castellano, your visitors are here. I'd been expecting them. Send them in. Sterling and Vivian Whitmore walked in, looking like they'd aged 10 years in 3 weeks. Mother's perfect makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes, and Sterling's silver hair seemed thinner. His powerful presence diminished like air slowly leaking from a balloon. They stood in my office, taking in the obvious wealth and power of the space, and I saw the exact moment they realized their son, their failure, their disappointment, now held their fate in his hands. Deacon, Sterling started, his voice broken like I'd never heard it before. We need those contracts. No, I said simply, turning from the window to face them. You need those contracts. I don't need anything from you anymore. Mother's perfect composure finally cracked like expensive china hitting concrete. I did what I thought was best. The Whitmore name meant everything. You have to understand. The opportunities it provided, the doors it opened. It meant everything to you. To me, it meant nothing but pain, rejection, and 23 years of being told I wasn't good enough for a name that wasn't even mine to begin with. Please, Sterling begged. And I'd never seen him beg for anything in his life. Quentin doesn't know. He doesn't deserve to lose everything because of our mistakes. I thought about that for a moment, really considered it. Quentin, despite being the golden child, had never been intentionally cruel. He'd been oblivious, privileged, and dismissive, but not cruel. He was a victim too, in his own way, raised to believe a lie just like I was. I'll make you a deal, I said, moving to sit behind my desk, the power dynamic clear. I'll keep the contracts for 1 year. In that time, Quentin needs to work in your warehouses. Real work. Loading trucks, handling inventory, learning the actual business from the ground up. No special treatment, no shortcuts, no executive fast track. He punches a clock like everyone else. If he lasts the full year without quitting, if he actually learns what I learned, I'll extend the contracts. If he quits or you intervene to make it easier for him, I pull everything immediately. They exchanged glances, 28 years of marriage compressed into a single look of defeat. He won't last a month, Sterling said quietly. Then you better hope he inherited more from Harrison Vale than just his eyes, I replied, watching the final piece of truth hit them. Mother gasped. You know about Harrison. I know about everything. Rodrigo was very thorough. Did you think you were the only one who could keep secrets? The difference is, Rodrigo's secrets were waiting to set me free. Yours were chains keeping everyone prisoner. They had no choice but to agree to my terms. As they turned to leave, Mother stopped at the door. Do you hate us? She asked, not turning around. No, I said honestly. Hate would mean you still have power over me. You're just strangers who happened to raise me. The last time I saw Quentin, he was wearing work boots and a uniform with trainee stitched on the pocket, standing in the same Newark warehouse where I'd spent 3 years. His soft hands were already blistering from the work, sweat staining his collar by noon. But for the first time in our lives, he looked at me with something approaching respect, maybe even understanding. You knew, didn't you? He asked during lunch break, sitting on the same loading dock where I used to eat with Eddie and the guys. This whole time you knew you'd win in the end. No, I admitted, handing him a bottle of water. I just knew that being called useless was better than being useless. Every insult, every dismissal, every time they celebrated you while ignoring me, it was all building something they never expected. Strength. Real strength. Not the kind you buy with money or inherit with a name. He nodded slowly, looking at his blistered hands. Maybe it's my turn to build some. Maybe it is. Nadira was right about one thing. Blood doesn't make you family, but it does determine inheritance. The Whitmores gave Quentin everything they had to give. Money, status, hollow praise, and a lie he'd have to live with forever. But Rodrigo Castellano, a man I never met, gave me something worth more. He gave me the truth, a purpose, and the knowledge that I was wanted, watched over, and worthy even when no one else believed it. The warehouse supervisor who was called useless now controls one of the largest shipping empires in the Americas. The golden boy works the loading dock, learning what sweat equity really means. And the parents who played God with their children's lives discovered that karma keeps perfect records and always collects its debts with interest. Sometimes the best inheritance isn't what someone gives you. It's what you become when they give you nothing at all. Every slight becomes strength. Every dismissal becomes determination. And every moment you're made to feel worthless becomes fuel for the fire that eventually burns down their house of lies. But I kept that folder, the one that changed everything. Because every morning, when I sit in my Miami office watching the sunrise paint the Atlantic in shades of gold and possibility, I read Rodrigo's letter one more time. Not for the money or the power, but for 5 words I waited 23 years to hear. Welcome home, my real son. those words mean more than $400 million. They mean more than 40 floors of glass and steel. They mean that somewhere, someone saw my worth when everyone else saw waste. Someone believed in me when I was trained not to believe in myself. Someone loved me enough to wait, to watch, and to ensure that truth would eventually win. The Whitmores taught me how to survive neglect. Rodrigo Castellano made sure I'd thrive because of it. And that's the greatest inheritance of all. Knowing that sometimes the family that throws you away is just clearing the path for the family that's waiting to claim you. If you enjoyed this story about discovering your true worth and finding where you really belong, please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps other people find these stories of triumph over family betrayal. Share it with anyone who needs to hear that their worth isn't determined by those who refuse to see it. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss our next story. Drop a comment below telling me what you would have done if you discovered your entire life was built on lies. Would you forgive, or would you take your revenge? I read every single comment, and your thoughts inspire our next stories. Until next time, remember, sometimes the best revenge is becoming everything they said you never could be.